I'm from Germany.
Sorry, I'm just recording the session.
I'm from Germany and living close to Cologne, like 30 kilometers away in a little village near a little small town. And I'm really interested in the topic of sustainability from this different aspects. So not only like the usual, we have to reduce plastic or we have to look for water consumption. So more in the broader term of sustainability and also responsibility that comes with it. So therefore, I would like to ask Jihe to continue.
Hello, John. I'm Jihe. I'm a master's student in social and public innovation, and I used to work as a product designer before I started my master. And back then, I thought, okay, I'm not so ready, but yeah. So yeah, while working in the environment that I have to always be effective, and like when I'm hosting the research, I always aware about the ethical part of design, why we're doing this and how we can do better. And yeah, that's how connected to my interest of this class, I think. Nice to see you. And Niels can continue introducing.
And you are from Korea, right? You did
Yes,
mention
I'm
this.
from Korea.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm Niels. I just started this bachelor last year, so I'm in my second semester right now. And yes, I've joined this class as well because the topics we deal with are so broad and so many topics to discuss. I'm really interested in the discussion today, and I hope we'll see some new insights or new points of viewing the things that we already discussed as a group. Then I think Lara can go on.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Lara and I'm from Cologne. I'm half Italian, half German, and I'm in my fourth semester as Katinka. Yeah, I joined this seminar because I'm really interested in sustainability, natural processes, and biodesign concerning microorganisms, for example, and like what is under the soil, but you will find out in the presentation. And
you teamed up with Niels in this seminar.
Yes. I don't see Jonis, but Mariana.
I am Mariana. I'm from Portugal, and I'm finishing my bachelor this year. I'm doing a program that is called MEDIS, so I'm an international student at KISD, and I joined this seminar because I think it's really interesting to learn new theories about design and also about sustainability. I really like that field, and I really like to research more things, and it's really interesting. I don't know who is missing to talk, but
I think it's only me. Yes. Hi. Hello, everyone. So my name is Jie Kim, but you can call me Jane. I'm from South Korea, and I'm a master program integrated design at KISD. But so my study will be focused on more like social and public innovation, which is quite broad topic. And yeah, I worked in several fields, in especially technology field as designer. So like it was quite interesting to see that like not really technological perspective like into this topic, because like surrounding like everything like surrounded by me was more like technology like perspective. Nowadays it's more like booming. So yeah, I really enjoyed the topics from your book. Also, I focused on caring, which was really, really interesting to me. So I want to talk about caring with you. Oh, yeah, a lot more. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Thank you for the introductions, and I think two keywords came up to me. The first one is sustainability. I think because you cannot design nowadays without taking sustainability into consideration, and I think our conversations also explored opportunities to approach sustainability from a very specific design perspective. And Lara, I think you mentioned natural processes and biodesign as one of the options. And of course, it's way beyond the normal ways of reusing things and recycling things. And I think we've been investigating this topic in all its diversity as far as we can do in this time. The next thing are the broad topics that you've been super excited about, and I think this will be a little bit the framing that we're having today, not to get lost. I think one of you, I think it was Katinka, who mentioned, "Oh, sorry for using so much space for connecting all the topics." Of course, all the topics are interconnected, and I think if we could achieve not only in the seminar but also by this more or less closing sessions, some insights for you, how you sort of relate the broader picture that you're having with opportunities sort of to frame problems from a design perspective and understanding who are the partners you need to be in dialogue with, because we understand, of course, that in integrated design, it's not only about taking the perspective of an ecological professional view or a biological or economical, but also to talk to those guys. Even if designers with their empathy think, well, I can be in every position, it's super important to have this conversation. And just to mention, because the topic was also about data literacy, and I think this is what we got a lot of your book and of your sources, John. The references, the cases, the statistical data that was sometimes very strong and brought to the point. If you come up with 1%, 5%, or 3%, or 20 times, or whatever, we try to investigate this a little bit deeper and to understand better the context, maybe the intended and unintended meanings that were going along with certain visualizations that we both found through your very sort of broad and extensive index. Some of the stuff was outdated, but this is life nowadays. But the students came up with other aspects as well. And so I think this helps us a bit in our conversations. And for today, I was asking, as said, to maybe come up with some sort of key aspects that you find that you want to share. And one of the key aspects that John and I discussed before is the question of relations. So how can we relate to a certain phenomena? How can we relate to the environment? How can we relate to humans? Yeah, we talked about the farmer. We talked about the kids that are producing the sneakers for us that we buy for factor 25 of the amount that the kids will get in a month. But also relations to microbes. So, for example, what's very hard to understand for us. And so I think this could be a bit of a conversation. I don't know, John, if you want to respond to that, or if we should start with Niels and Lara to talk a bit about grounding and soil.
Well, just two sentences by way of welcoming you and myself to this discussion.
Yes.
It's so welcome to have some feedback and have other people, giving me what they kind of pick out of the book. So I was saying to Philip earlier, although I wrote it 6 years ago and it's come out and been in the world quite a long time, the basic proposition hasn't changed so much. So that's a relief to me. But it's not an easy proposition. The proposition is that things are changing very profoundly, and that therefore kind of small tactical changes are not really going to be enough for us to navigate through. And that therefore our search, and it's only in certain areas touched on by the book, is what are the foundational features of the kind of ways we meet our daily life, and how can those be changed? And I wanted to just say that if you're confused or frustrated or lack clarity, then so am I, and I'm the one who wrote the book. So I want to just not apologize, but to say I think that if everything looks simple, you're probably not in contact with reality so much. And also just to say, which I've understood more since the book came out in talking to people, that the kind of transition that we're in, which I must say is happening rather quickly now, according in some arguments, we're talking about a story that goes back 500 years. You know, the beginnings of capitalism, the beginnings of when commodities first existed, the beginnings of being alienated from the land. They're not a recent thing. So yes, I mean, neoliberalism, you know, extreme capitalism is maybe just 50 years old, but the kind of long story is probably 500 years old. And something like that will not just shift because somebody writes a book or because people get stressed about a, you know, a word like sustainability. And anyway, but I want to hear from you. But I actually personally, I'm surprisingly optimistic, although that we're talking about a change over a very long period of time and a rather deeply rooted system of belief and behavior and everything else. Yeah, there are so many signs of positive change that despite the kind of chaos around us and the explosions in Cologne today, which I just heard about, I'm optimistic. But we'll come back to that later. So yeah, that was just a few words to say why I'm so happy to be here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you for that, John. So I think maybe Lara and Niels, I don't know how you decided, how you presented. You can both have your mics open. Maybe one is sharing the screen. And I understand that it's more about talking than about seeing, but maybe you will share some of the details as well. I still have in mind your presentations and still have a very clear idea of this mycelium coffin in front of me. So I'm keen to hear a bit of your sort of key insights that you want to share and maybe questions that you want to address to John.
Yes, sure. So Niels and me decided to take the second chapter, which is grounding. And we were really inspired by all these projects you brought up, but decided to dig into one of them in one topic, which is mycelium, and how mycelium can like heal the soil and so reverse the land degradation and soil erosion and all the activities also from human which bring to soil erosion and desertification. But yeah, we talked about mycelium, so the radical, the rooting structure of fungi, and the mycoremediation. So the use of fungi to degrade or remove toxins from the environment in order to heal the soil and kind of reverse the process of soil degradation. This is a coffin made out of mycelium, which is a product which is on the market and designed in the Netherlands. The aim of the living coffin is to turn our polluted cemeteries into forests by disassembling toxins from dead bodies. Because our traditional coffins are made out of metal, wood preservatives, and paint compounds. And also the body itself inside the coffin has a lot of microbes and chemicals which are released during the process of decomposition, even if we think that we have clothes on when we are buried. And yeah, human body take up to 12 years to decompose in traditional coffin and only 2 months in mycelium coffins. And yeah, this product shows us a shift of traditional funerals, which creates new ways of being remembered. Because current burial methods can lead to soil degradation and groundwater pollution. This was just in a nutshell our presentation and where we wanted to focus on. And Niels will give you a little bit more facts and figures about burials and the impact on the environment.
Yes, exactly. So we dug a bit deeper after our presentation and looked into how burials actually affect the CO2 emission. So, For example, a quote we found is, a cremation gives off on average about 180 kilograms of CO2, which is if you use the traditional method of cremation. And the big problem is that a lot of products, like for example, if you have fillings in your teeth, for example, all of those things get emitted into the air as well. So for example, it is also said that 16% of all mercury emitted in the United Kingdom comes just through the cremation of bodies. Another quote, cremation uses about the same amount of domestic energy as a person uses in a month. And yeah, globally, cremation also emits over 6.8 million metric tons of carbon dioxide every year, which is 0.02% of the global CO2 emission. That doesn't sound much, but Lara also found on the left side like a graph which shows how many deaths there are just in Germany. And if we just look at the 2020 numbers, it's almost 100,000 people. And if we just imagine, we don't necessarily know how they get buried or if they get buried, but if every single person was decomposed through cremation, that would be a big problem on the long run. And yeah, it just stacks up. So we thought the mycelium coffin is still a very great alternative, given the fact that next to the cremation, there's also the use of just regular coffins, which also, where Lara said, the problem is that they are composed of many materials that can harm the environment. And the decomposing of those coffins takes a long time, and in the end can even be a bad thing for the surrounding soil.
Yes, at the end, we thought it would be interesting to investigate some questions in order to create more data in the future, which are questions like, if everyone would use mycelium coffins, in how much time and at which rate would soil be restored and so stop the process of soil erosion? And also, how much public space would be saved if graveyards are being replaced by forests? And last but not least, how would our values relate to burials change, and how would the relationship to nature evolve when we consider microorganisms, for example? Thank you. This is the part of grounding.
We had some MiG jets flying overhead. We have a lair base near here. Once a week, they fly 1 feet over my office, and so you can't hear, so I have to be muted. I thought that was great, and what I liked about it was two things. One is that you started off the presentation with a positive story called, here is a practice which we can make the soil healthier, because my general position is that if one begins with the bad news, i.e. how much is wasted in energy or pollution from traditional burials, then people quickly turn off and lose interest. But if you start with a positive story and then go on to explain why the positive story is relevant, that's very nice. But secondly, I'm so happy to meet somebody else with an interest in dead bodies, because it is quite a serious part of the story. And I just put it in the chat 2 weeks ago. Have you heard of terramation? Anyway, this is cutting out the middleman of the mycelium coffin and going directly to compost. So you can look at that later. It's of course a Californian thing, but they said, well, if you have to manufacture a mycelium coffin, it's a bit kind of, it's fantastic, but a bit slow. And maybe we could just kind of go directly to put the body through some process that would become an accelerated composter. This is just really to add to your list of exotic subjects. But what I like, as I said, is that there are so many ways to feed the soil that if you choose bodies, or you can choose all sorts of different waste flows in society of food or agriculture or whatever, that just kind of, once you start to look, there are many more. That's another way of thinking about it. Another comment about just the general subject of that chapter on grounding. So that basically took me, the best part of a year to understand what are design people supposed to think about the soil and the earth? Where do we start? And I just began at that point to kind of meet people who were connecting design skills with soil repair. But that world has expanded enormously since that chapter was written. And I don't know how many of you are looking into soil. I just put one example. I have literally, I think, 200-300 case studies that people send me about soil care, experimentation. But there's a thing called, if you're interested, called the Soil Care Network was started last year, actually maybe a bit earlier, by some academics and researchers to say, okay, we can have scientists can study the scientific behavior of soil. We can have environmentalists and ecologists, look at the life in the soil. But what are we supposed to do about it? What are the different ways of caring for soil? And that newsletter is a rather interesting and unusual one because it combines the science together with, for example, what can artists do? What can writers do? What can psychologists do to get people to think about the soil at all? So that's part of the kind of expansion of this world. And I'll stop with this final sentence, is that I think that the opportunity for design is not just to kind of design, so to speak, interventions like the one you've described, but also the journey of people thinking about soil for the first time, taking an interest in a particular aspect, learning about what they can do practically, and then monitoring that progress. So there's a whole kind of soil care journey beginning to be sketched out in different contexts. So a huge amount of work is going to be opening up there. So thank you. Nice way to start.
Yeah, thank you also from my side. It's nice to see the first presentation wrapped up in 3 minutes from your side, also maybe enriched through the knowledge that you have based on the conversations that we had with the other groups. And I agree, and I think what's really nice, I think it was clear when we read the chapter, when we discussed it, how important soil is and how many people have a closer look at soil. And you came up on your Miro board with a couple of questions, and some questions that might be too open. For example, how can we focus on stopping deforestation without stopping the production of wood? That's very tough. That's sort of very open. I think what you need connected to this is something like a what if or an intervention that then goes into this larger scope. And I think that you found it with a coffin, actually, and that's what I like. That even, of course, when you come up with the statistics and data and say how you're going to change land use, or how you're going to change or which potential the compost will have, somebody will raise the finger and say, yes, but that's just 0.0 whatever percent. But I think it gives you the large scope, and I think other examples might follow. So I think if you're really passionate and interested about mycelium, for example, and then such a thing, especially in all its cultural connotations, how will it change? So let's come back to the point of relation. How will it change our relation to the end of life and all the habits and ceremonies that are related to that? How will it change the relation to the microbes inside and outside the human bodies during lifetime and afterwards? And I think that's super interesting. This is a very general question, but bringing it in such a topic, I think opens up wonderful opportunities for conversations. I mean, just for your note, John, at KISD we have seminars and projects sort of explore design opportunities and come up with a design provocation with a specific design, whereas in seminars it's really more about analyzing, reflecting. But I think we should come to the point where we say, how can I use this in my sort of daily life? How could this be a starting point for other explorations? So I think that worked out quite well in your case, and I'm happy
Two
to
quick
see.
postscripts, if I could. One is that you're the second group in 10 years to look at death and burials with a spontaneous way. There was some students in Luzern in Switzerland had the same kind of interest, and they went one step further. They went to look at the different graveyards of Luzern and how much space was occupied. And you're quite right, they do take up a lot of space, which is not really so productive. And they took one step further and they said, why can't we combine the graveyard system with the horticulture system? So they came up with a plan that people would be buried in a kind of compost making environment underneath where the plants and the vegetables of the city were grown, so that your body would become instantly integrated into the metabolic cycles of the city. And I was expecting a terrible argument. We had the manager of the graveyard and somebody from the church here, and they said, oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, so people would be open to surprising things, I must say. Oh, sorry, and one more thing. Wood production, I saw that same question that Philip mentioned. I think there's a gigantic question running through the whole design world about whether our task is to find alternative forms of production, which is what the kind of bioeconomy and the circular economy is about. We have to be more efficient. Or I think more radically, and frankly, where we're going to end up is maybe production is not the purpose of design in many cases. Maybe our task is to help life thrive, and that if that means don't have any wood production or produce far less, then we do that not as a form of efficiency, but because life becomes in our culture more important than producing things. But that's such a big question for design. I just will leave it on the table. We can come back to another time.
Okay, I stopped adding more comments because I'm quite inspired by some of the facts that you brought up and other issues that might emerge. I can put it on the Miro, or as you all can put it on the Miro. Is there any other comment from you? Because it shouldn't be just a show between the presenters and John and myself. I mean, looking at it now from your different perspectives that all dealt with the topic for all of you. Any close link that you see maybe?
Yeah, I wanted to add something. Because what you brought up, that we don't want to reduce our wood consumption, for example. So we want to have our living standards, and that's kind of the same when it comes to burials, because we want to have this ceremony. We need it, and that's an opportunity also to continue to do what we were doing, but in a different way. So there's also where I see the role of the designer.
I think it's so important to avoid arguments about that end up with you telling people to consume less, because I mean, it's true, but it's a very hard work way. Much better to say, look, we have come up with a better way to celebrate death. And here is a better way, which is feeds back nutrients into nature, connects people to life, whatever, better rituals, more beautiful ceremonies. So where possible, come along with a positive story that they then realize at the end, oh, by the way, this consumes 10 times less resources or is 10 times less use of space than the old one. But don't start by, telling people that the less word is a very hard word to use. And if we can avoid it most of the time.
Very crucial, yes, I think so. All the time I'm thinking about mushrooms that you sell, telling that they're from the graveyard. I know that there's a high resistance. I mean, compost out of human bodies is another step, but you can start, or even berries. I mean, because they're growing there, but people don't like it. They don't eat it just because they're from a graveyard. For some good reasons, maybe, both psychological and physiological, but this might be a starting point as well. Okay, yeah, cool. So I think it would be perfect if we would switch a bit to dwelling, because dwelling, Katinka, you try to connect everything, and of course you also connected dwelling to good and healthy soil. What is just one of the notions, actually. Do you want to share a bit, actually, your findings and your line of thought, and maybe come up with some questions.
Yes, well. So, yeah, I think I'm first gonna catch up the connection again between dwelling and the soil, because if we look at dwelling as space use, we can definitely see the connection between dwelling and therefore the space and techniques to get healthy soil again, which connects to the point of the depaving movement you mentioned in the chapter of dwelling, where I have some figures about the sealed or sealed surfaces in Germany, or the paved surfaces in Germany. We have around about 14.4% percent of the area in Germany is for settlement and traffic area, from which 41.5% are sealed, so closed surfaces, which is I think around about like 7% of the general surface in the German area. Although we have a slightly optimistic future for us, because there is getting less and less surface dedicated to surface sealing, so they try to reduce the amount. It's still growing because it's just less gets dedicated each year, but it's still a growing amount. Yeah, and especially for the, I have to check where it is. Oh yeah, there. Especially for the soil topic, we have, as I already mentioned, the depaving, which is which is stated that it is quite expensive and quite an effort for from the government side to depave city spaces. But there are those projects from persons connected to that. You mentioned the parking day project or organization and events, which is nowadays, or at least in Germany, it's more for not depaving, but more for using the space better, for example, for biking lanes or such things. And therefore, I come to the general distribution of area in Germany and in Cologne as an example between general surface of the country and the cities, because in the Germany in general consists of around about 50% agricultural spaces, around about 30% of woods, and then only 14.4% of the settlement and traffic area. Although in Cologne the numbers look quite different, where traffic and settlement together take up about 60%, and agriculture and woods only 17% and 16%. Therefore, you mentioned the my Biotope City project and the general greening and microgreen spaces in the city, which I think is really interesting, especially in a patchwork kind of way to implement in the city that is already existing. Therefore, I have two projects, or one project and one company that focuses on that. This is first is Mobilane. It concentrates of inside and outside greens that you can buy over there, and a nice architectural building in Düsseldorf. It's the Köbögen 2, which is completely greened on the outside. This is the Köbögen, and this is the website of Mobilane. And therefore, I looked at the German side for the Naturschutzbund, so Natural Protection Group. They have two sites, sadly it's only in German, where you can look for seeding and wall greenery for yourself, facade greenery for yourself, where you can pick up the best suited plants for that. Another thing which could be a solution, or at least a positive thing towards it, is the problem of the pollinators, or the pollinator deaths that are rising. which where you mentioned the pollinator pathways that are installed in Britain, which also I see has a high potential, because you can not only have like pathways, but also build your own pathways in smaller sections, like in with flowers from your balcony or something like that, where you can build a patchwork bee path or pollinator path from your own personal side on. And another thing that you can do as a person for yourself is, if it's not only putting plants outside that pollinators like, you can also build like insect hotels, also again from the Natural Protection Organization here in Germany, a little introduction to build something like that for yourself, that is not really expensive, but helps a lot of insects to live, especially in the cities. And a thing that, or a problem that you stated with, or that you addressed with the statement of the Dutch architect, that we do not need more space or more buildings. I personally think that we do need more space and more buildings, not in the term of we have to create new where we already have old ones and just abandon them, but more in the term of we have to reuse the space and reuse the sources we have. But if we reuse the spaces, we still need some rooftop over the head to sleep, or if we want to, if we don't want to lower our standards in this case. And that leads me to a problem of the materials that are used in building, especially concrete, which needs a lot of sand. And each year, 70 to 80 billion tons of sand are demanded for the building industry, which was a huge amount of Empire State Buildings. I think around about like 300 million. I don't have my note with me right now. It was a high number to get the grasp of 80 billion tons of sand. And therefore, I looked into the building material of wood, which is also problematic, as we already saw. But it has some benefits for building, and therefore I have the example of this building, which is awarded with a Green Award and is standing in Germany. It is the highest wood-built skyscraper in Germany right now. And in general, apart from the topic dwelling, focusing on the point of living in the city and building houses, I saw many connections to the other topics. Therefore, this little virwar, so in the middle here, because I saw dwelling as the question again, is there a responsible way and responsible materials? And this led me to the space and place to grow and produce food, and for example, on rooftops and on unused sealed surfaces, which also leads to the creation of common spaces to create common feelings and living, and therefore also food production, etc. Which leads to the common spaces, and common feeling leads to the caring aspects. For example, if you create new structures of housing, you can implement generation housing. If you look at, oh no, skip the point. If you look at the general recreation of the city, you can improve the moving possibilities for movement in general, and also the production of food. And to close the loop again to my starting point, dwelling can also have an impact on the good and healthy soil, because if you start to depave, it might take a bit of effort to get the soil good and healthy again, but then you can use it in the sense of the recreated city, as well as the techniques and utensils to clean water and collect clean water. Yes, it was a bit of cake, but I'm yeah.
Were you doing this on your own, or by this little journey we just heard, or do I need to hear?
It was my own work, so I
Okay.
didn't come up with someone.
So, well, thank you anyway. It's just so fascinating, very deeply fascinating to see what people get out of a chapter like that, and where it takes them and what they find and so on. So thank you for that, just as a piece of enlightenment for me. I think that the discussion I've had for 20 years is trying to get people to separate what is important for the real estate industry and the concrete business, and the people who build things. They have a very clear need to build more things because that's what their business is. That is separate from people should have a place to sleep, a roof over their head, security, food, and social support. And there's a gigantic marketing industry trying to persuade us that the first one and the second one are the same story. But what I started to try and do in that chapter is to separate out those two agendas, because somebody called it the real estate industrial complex, is one of the big economic drivers of the whole world. And concreting things and building things is a sign of progress. It feeds directly into the plus column of every country's national accounts and so on. But again, what I've learned from the COVID, never mind about that chapter, is that when people run out of space and run out of resources, then they become very creative in living in new places which already exist. So I totally appreciate what you said about we need new spaces, but new spaces is not the same as new buildings. Maybe we could agree. And new spaces can be old office buildings, airports, shopping centers that have been abandoned during the economic change, and how do we repurpose those as places to live and maybe make things and maybe grow things. And I must say, in that chapter I didn't cover so much of that, but since then there's an explosion of interesting projects of people occupying abandoned shopping malls or abandoned airports or abandoned this and that. So the space is there, but the demand for new buildings is what the governments want, the policymakers. So when they say build back better, which is the slogan post-COVID, they literally mean pouring concrete and building structures. And I personally think this is one of my big problems with this whole kind of green building facade phenomenon. It's very popular, but 95% of those structures are basically concrete shells with plants added onto the outside. So the embodied energy in the structure is not so much less than it was an old-fashioned one. And that it's much more interesting in terms of sustainability for a city to find a way to put very lightweight structures inside an office and occupy it that way. But that was great. Just one more thing, I'll put it in the chat, that the alternative to putting trees on the outside of buildings, which is a big boom in architecture at the moment, is and this has come in the last year really, something they call microbiome-inspired green infrastructure, or MIGI. It's quite fascinating because, and this comes from outside design and outside architectures, from the biology world, where they're really beginning to understand that human bodies, benefit from being in a healthy cloud of bacteria. It's not about being in like a laboratory, and that they're saying, well, there are ways to grow clouds of healthy bacteria in various growing mediums, like a kind of gel. And their kind of discussion is, how do we spread, healthy bacteria around a city so that people are healthier as well as the buildings being healthier? So this kind of group, if you want to find out about this crazy thing, it's a guy called Jake Robinson and some other people are looking at how you retrofit kind of surfaces onto existing buildings, which are also environments for bacteria to live in, bacterial gel. So you have kind of retrofitting green, slimy walls to office blocks and so on. And yeah, it's going very quickly because it's so much cheaper than building a whole new building. It's 10 times more efficient than planting trees on the top of skyscrapers. And there's a lot of interest in, certainly in China and in other places, in connecting the biome world, the bacterial world, with the architecture world, and without having to kind of construct things. So in terms of dwelling in strange environments, that's what I think will be the next thing, is realizing that bacteria are our friends and not just our enemies. And how can we then kind of put that back into the city?
I like the quote, dwelling in strange environments, because I noted down 3 things. So the first comment would be on lower our standards. I think that's because you said we don't want to lower our standards. I think that's also a very traditional way to see things, but maybe you can paraphrase it from a different way. I mean, to say, maybe let's think of, dwelling in strange environments or in extreme environments, or rethinking what environments could mean. As John said, either sort of use existing space or sort of rethink existing space or space to be built. And again, I think the connectedness that you has shown is super interesting, but I think it could become even more convincing and helpful if you sort of have a starting point in the micro level. Yeah, in this whole sort of area that you have been exploring. It could be, because we talked about this as well, pretty much. For example, how can we feed the people in a city? And you come up with this rooftop or place consumption, space consumption. And then you can connect this phenomena that you're about to explore with all the other connections and benefits. I mean, in Germany, I think it's same in France. We have to prepare for more and more very dry and hot times on the one hand, and on the other hand, a lot of rainfall. Yeah. So, and why? It goes also along with all the paving, or at least the consequences that we have in the houses, that the basements are always full of water. So here, having sort of a starting point like rooftop farming, and I'm not talking about architectural cosmetics like putting trees on the top, but I refer to what you mentioned in the book, John, and we discussed it because we had a lack of sources. So this example of Cleveland, where you said the use of 80% of every vacant lot generated obviously a lot of food opportunities, and if you take all the rooftops and so on, then you have 100% of the fresh produce necessary. So, because I think that's super important. When I work with students, and I think we made the same exercise, I ask how much space is needed to feed one person. And then the people, some think 2 square meters, others think 2,000. Of course, it goes along whether it's vegetarian or vegan, but for sure 2 square meters isn't enough. And I think those little exercises, especially if you, for example, think when we work together with students from Shanghai to say, yeah, this urban gardening and rooftop gardening, this could feed all the people in Shanghai. Of course, it cannot, but it can sort of partially, and it can sort of change the relation. And how do you think, John, that there could be really figures that we could sort of really use? Because of course, when you say this could produce 100% of all the fresh produces, I would say, well, the Americans don't need so much fresh products because they just have convenience products. So what's hidden in those statistics in terms of oversimplifying? And I think space consumption is sort of one thing. Do you have any other parameters that could sort of help to sort of start ideating?
It's a very good question. I'll put this, I have, again, hundreds of studies about food systems. I think the important thing is to try not to get trapped into false black and white distinctions. So, yeah, somebody says, well, I can't remember if that was one of the dead links, the Cleveland study, but the Cleveland study was a research exercise called If We Had To, How Much Food Could We Grow in Cleveland? Nobody was suggesting that they should just stop all forms of import and grow everything in Cleveland. There was a kind of academic exercise, but they did then discover, they were amazed by how much could in principle be grown in Cleveland, not that that became their plan. And actually the interesting thing is the hybrid, some city farming, some, peri-urban, just around the city, and then there's sort of things like coffee that come from a long distance. The trick is to try and balance these different sources in a kind of more complex way, but with the participation of the citizens, so that it's not just kind of some expensive supermarket making all these decisions for you. And so that book I've just given you, Carolyn Steele's Citopia, looks into this, and she's an architect. So she says it's not just about whether you can grow food in the public parks or some vast distance away. It's how you combine the different locations. And there, what's so fascinating, and that's changed a big just since I wrote the book, is that the notion of producers connecting directly with the city is accelerating just out of incredibly fast, partly because of COVID, of course, so that farmers had to sell things directly to people because the other distribution systems started to kind of get blocked when COVID was so bad. And so like in China, they have this thing called farmer live streaming, in which something like, I don't know, 500,000 farmers now communicate directly with city people, not just to sell the food, but just to have a relationship with their country situation and the city situation. And Philip and I were discussing earlier that maybe a coffee farmer doesn't want to sell directly to one person in a street in Cologne, but the point is that there are many, many intermediaries that can be designed out and have a different sort of relationship where the cooperative of coffee farmers connects with a cooperative of coffee drinkers in Cologne. So that sort of relationship. And so those kind of, it's thinking about the logistics as well as the location is very important in thinking about food and who's going to feed who how. But I must say, I'm quite, have you heard of the Open Food Network? That's another one of these examples of, which is since the book, by the way, where basically existing technology transformed something called a food system, because people who are figure out, I run a farm, I have a farm full of potatoes, but the normal distribution is broken. Now what do I do? And then the Open Food Network say, okay, we'll make you an internet shop to sell potatoes directly to people in the city. So that's happened, very quick, very rough, nothing fancy. But a lot of those kind of, emergency arrangements are now becoming consolidated, and you begin to get a reorganization of what food is grown where as a result of an emergency. But that makes things possible that people before would have thought was inconceivable.
I think listening to what you said, I think what is talking about, we talked about the coffee farmer this morning, and of course, maybe the cooperative of the coffee farmers in Colombia wants to be connected to a small coffee roastery in Cologne. So this means, I think, that we can think of adding sort of specific services where we sort of increase the value of something, and coffee, wine, olive oil, chocolate, all those are examples where the origin is super important. For potatoes, it's not so important. Yeah, and of course, in a project 2 years ago, I figured out that there are 400 different species and sorts of potatoes. And the students came up with a design idea to show this to the people and make like potato tasting ceremonies. And this is from that farmer, this is from that farmer. Or you sort of somehow relate it to fermentation and say, what can we do with those specific potatoes and so on. And I think here there are a lot of ideas where we can generate value in a different way that helps to connect to the origins and appreciate what we are eating. And this is a new notion maybe of processed food, so where we implement cultural knowledge into sort of healthy food chains.
It's what when I was listening to Katinka talking, I was saying that whether you need a large or a small house, or whether it should be in the center or somewhere else, is one question. But the other question is, what sort of intensity of services are available to the person dwelling in that house nearby? So for example, if you have if you live in India and you have a small apartment in the center, you're surrounded by 500 people cooking food on a trolley or on a truck. You don't need a kitchen. You can have or you need a tiny kitchen, because basically the food is all around you being cooked. Same with childcare. Same, you don't need a big room full of washing machines, but there's somebody standing outside your door who will go and clean your clothes in a river, whatever. So the location of services and there's the location of social support.
So you guys are all moving, but John stopped moving. Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Partly from the office or whatever. And I think the same thing, they'll discover the same thing about their home. Why do you need a large home in a suburb when you can have a tiny home in the center with lots of services outside your physical apartment? And then maybe you go somewhere else in the winter or in the summer, there's some sort of, you know, a commune or an eco village or a farm. And there's another one of that, you live there as well. So it's this notion of one person, one dwelling, and then everything being in the dwelling. That's why they become very expensive, very inconvenient, and good for the real estate industry, but not so good for everybody else.
Maybe this refers to actually your comment on not lowering our standard of having our own washing machines, drilling machines, home cinema, everything is at home. So this increases space consumption and increases social isolation. So I think we can really implement a lot of qualities, and there's a lot of discourses since at least one decade, if not longer, in urban planning and architecture about new modes of living. There's a wonderful publication of the German architecture critic Niklas Maaß, How We Might Live Tomorrow, wie wir morgen leben werden. Super interesting, collecting examples from all over the world, giving really exactly what you brought. I mean, why do I need a kitchen? The same if you're in Taipei, the people don't have a kitchen and they can invite you to their place because it's not necessary. And even if they have a kitchen, they never use it because it's way more convenient and nice and social sort of to do. So that all this goes into dwelling. So I think it's a wonderful example to connect it actually. Yeah, cool.
I have a friend in New York who used his kitchen for the first time in 15 years during COVID. He said, I hardly knew I had a kitchen. It was like behind the door. But for the previous 15 years, he ate his breakfast, lunch, and dinner, everything on the streets of New York. And that is really being accelerated, this notion of the sort of mobile restaurant where you gather some people together, you sit down on the ground, and then the food comes to you on bikes or, you know, cargo bikes or whatever. That is not just convenient, but the economics changes profoundly. So the cost of a restaurant building and the fixed equipment, the borrowing money from a bank, you know, the borrowing money for the branding, all that, you know, becomes very expensive. If you get rid of all of that and just say one cook, people eating, and then they meet where they need, yeah, that's a totally different concept of a restaurant business.
But it's easier for designer to design and market a new kitchen line with all the new vacuum ovens and whatever, than to market or communicate the idea and the value of sort of going to a place outside your own flat. There are a couple of places where you have shared kitchens where you can sort of cook and eat.
Yeah,
and
I don't agree. I mean, there's anything to do with mobile kitchens and bikes and food. There's a lot of design stuff. There's one called Zupen. I saw this like 10 years ago in Switzerland. I don't know if they're still going, but these two designers said, why do we have to go to some inconvenient location to get a soup? Why can't the soup come to where the people want the soup? And they designed a rather small kitchen. Then they had 2 cargo bikes that were suitable for carrying soup around. They designed the cups. And anyway, they just did the whole thing. It was brilliant. And they were doing quite well just taking soup around the Zurich. I think it was in Zurich. And there's so much of that can be done, so much.
It's a different notion of food miles than in the soup. En pedal. Okay. Yeah. So I have as a suggestion, maybe Jane to share, if not somebody else wants to share. I think we can have maybe 2 more.
Yes.
Next.
I can take over.
Talking about caring.
Yes.
That's also super interesting.
Yes. So yes, I focused on caring chapter, And there are some key findings from the chapter I want to talk about. Everyone might know about these key findings, but I will just go through the one by one. So the first one was the energy distribution, so energy blindness in healthcare, which was talking about the energy here, the 5% of all vehicle movements on British roads are health related, which is we are not really aware of it. So that was quite interesting key finding. So it's not only like centralized hospital system, it's more like the whole energy system in the caring sector. So the second key finding is the relation between the food industry and healthcare. So food market, which is pre-made like food, also like with lots of sugar or not really healthy, so it can also affect the healthcare. So we also need to be aware of the food market is connected to the healthcare system. Also, the third one is the technology in healthcare. So there are some the examples in the chapter, but I didn't bring it today. But just wanted to talk about the technology-wide, how we can kind of focus on the technology. So I found these data when I was preparing my presentation. So it was also more about the investment money, how much investment we need to put in the R&D sector, in the medical or like pharmaceutical research or something like that. But also it's nowadays it's more combining medical side, also technology side. It's more like kind of public healthcare technology is booming nowadays. So I found these data, which is about the 10 European countries with highest medtech employment. That means, so Germany is the first in this data, and then the United Kingdom, and then the following European countries like Switzerland, France, yeah, Italy, or something like that. So mainly very developed countries. Also, the other data I found is the number of people directly employed in the medical technology industry per 10,000 inhabitants. So here we can see the Ireland is the top, the first graph, and then Switzerland, Denmark, and Germany, Sweden, Belgium, UK, or something like that. So we can see the technology-wise, it's not only like putting the money into the field, it's also kind of creating the job markets, also kind of making the money from it. So it was quite interesting when I was looking into these data. So from that key finding, want to talk about it. So I will go through the questions so we can talk about it later. So so nowadays the healthcare technology are booming, such as startups that afford a better public healthcare. So what do you think about the direction of this movement? So which countries and communities do you think the healthcare technology should be more invested and applied? So these two questions I followed. And the next key finding was unbalanced healthcare expenditure. So this is from the sentence here, just 10% of the key trends impacting the health future, which is the invest money versus the 5% health, including healthcare ones that can flourish using the 5% the resource cost per person that we have now. So it was highlighting that like the money, invest money, or the money from the government, where is kind of unbalanced. So So from that key finding, also wanted to talk about, we see the data that here, this is, I found the data, healthcare expenditure for healthcare. So the global figures, this is about the global figures from all over the world. Social carers, including dementia, has been unpaid, underpaid worldwide. So the interesting fact that is from here, as you can see, the 78% of volunteers from the community is like volunteers. It's not really paid. It's, the money doesn't go into this volunteers. So the second 11% is people paid by not-for-profit organization, which is like charities. So it's just like not really paid much. So we also can see that the data from here from 2011 to 2019, as you can see that the unpaid care in US dollar is growing. It's not really decreasing. So it seems like still the problem is really critical, but we really don't see that much the money invested in the social care. So that was quite interesting and wanted to talk about it. So the question will be, in order to improve this issue on the social care works and the systems, what changes do we need to make? So the other question would be, in terms of the balance of the budget allocation between R&D and social care works, what would be key elements to determine from the government side? Because like when we create the kind of the issue as like for the investment, we need to also kind of persuade the policymaker or government or whoever decide, like we need to be a bit more kind of with the strong data, also kind of show that like we really need this. So that was quite kind of curious from my side. Also the other key finding was the community-based solution. So it's really interesting that so wanted to talk about how can you make a radical change for the community-based solution as a designer. So what are the types of community-based healthcare system where designers could contribute in a meaningful way, and how? So it's kind of related to each other. It's more like how we can contribute our like our work as a designer into this like community-based solution. And also, so the last key finding was, I was really focused on this topic about the dementia, social care solutions for dementia. So I found the data, which is highlighting the point, global population is aging. So here, as you can see, the forecasting dementia rate in 2050, here from this chart, as you can see here, these numbers, even though the population is decreasing, but the old elderly people are increasing based on the number. So increasing the numbers of the over 20s with dementia in 30 years will be this amount, like will be a large population in the worldwide. So it was almost doubled from the 2018 compared to the numbers. So yeah, so from that, wanted to talk about how can we make a solution for the both primary carers, such as families, relatives, and friends, and social care workers as a designer. And also, where do we need to look into first? So where do we need to start? And also the following question would be, the what percentage of budget allocation would be ideal to tackle this dementia problem from the government side? And so what steps do we need to like in your opinions? Yeah, I think that's it. There are quite lots of questions, so I'm not sure.
Very open, very specific.
Yes. It's like I'm kind of yeah, opening lots of topics now, but yeah, wanted to talk about these, yeah, the findings.
But they're great questions, Jane, and I'm so happy that you picked up on this, because just a quick anecdote, that the origin of that chapter on caring was when I think 1.5 years before I finished the book, gave a talk at the Mayo Clinic in America, the gigantic medical research center, on this exact subject, which was to say that there doesn't seem to be a clear relationship between the amount of money spent on research and technology on the one hand, and where the need is for care. And I could have been talking in a foreign language. Nobody had any understanding of what I was saying, because you had 2,000 people whose jobs and careers and self-identity was as researchers into the future of medical technology and cures. And the notion that actually we should spend more money on caring than on curing was just outside. They just couldn't understand it. Now, 5, 6, 7 years later, that sort of is beginning to change. But I just thought I would show you where I started from in this, frankly, sort of like a world of a mirror world. In there's a book called Health is Wealth from 2004, which is a book for the European Commission about the economy of medical technology. And you mentioned that so well at the beginning. And the bizarre thing, and I spent 25 years finding it as bizarre each time I think about it, is that for the government and for economists and for mainstream opinion, it is a good thing if more and more money is spent on health research, irrespective and separate from whether people are getting healthier or not. And so you get this extraordinary phenomenon of the numbers that you quoted of the amount of money spent, and those, I haven't seen those before, how many people are employed in health research. It's very large numbers. That is the world, that's the bubble that policymakers live in. They look at GDP. So every single dollar spent on research goes into GDP plus. Every expensive researcher living in goes in plus. And then it feeds into something called health real estate. So the real estate business builds clusters full of research labs and buildings and apartments for the researchers to live in. That is a whole sector by itself. Anyway, that is where the kind of mainstream is. And then you have something called care, which is where 95% of the care for people with dementia today, and frankly, in 10 years from time, will be family members and friends who don't get paid at all or not much. So the care economy is like almost non-financial, and then the tech economy is financial. So you have these two worlds sort of coexisting. And it's, it's a bizarre feature of our age that those two things are separated. All I would say is that, and you asked in one of your questions, what kind of social support can we give to the social care side of it? The answer is go and talk to people who are doing the caring, people with dementia, their families, their friends, which is what I've done in the past in dementia projects. Go and talk to the people who are doing this, say, what do you need? And 9 times out of 10, what they need is rather small, regular acts of support, somebody to talk to, somebody to take over for one morning. I think it was in France, they did some research that if a carer could have one morning free per month from being a carer, i.e. somebody else came in and took over, their health and their state of mind and their performance as a carer like doubled. Half a day a month, costing a tiny amount of money. But of course, the governments, that doesn't help GDP. So the governments put tens of billions of pounds into something called dementia research, looking for a cure, because that all goes into the positive. We employ more researchers, more buildings, more labs. Yeah, sorry, you're getting me onto my co-equal number one rant. So it's a completely insane situation. So the only way that I stay sane is to not try and stop the medical technology machine that does its thing, but to just unilaterally go to the places where the carer economy happens and talk to the people there. And there's, again, of course, all sorts of things that social innovation can do to help carers and people with dementia, but they're low tech, low cost, low profile, and therefore nobody tends to talk about them until you find somebody, if you get dementia or somebody in your family, then you find out about all of this. But that €200 chat space that I mentioned at the beginning, that the Alzheimer's Society in England added to their £2 million website, the €200 chat space has transformed the relationships between carers. So carers talk to each other, and just the ability of carers to talk to each other makes them feel stronger. Even if they get no practical help or even answers, just the ability to feel that they're not on their own is transformative. So that was a huge lesson for me. I was involved for 5 years in helping to persuade them to do this website. Yeah, we need all the information in one place. And it wasn't my decision to add this kind of €200 chat space, but they did that. And then there's tens of thousands of people every day on the chat space talking to each other, carers. And that's kind of social innovation, which costs almost nothing. I must stop.
Yeah, I was thinking again of the term of relations that we sort of mentioned in the very beginning, and try to look at the lens of relations. And of course, I think it's the relations between the people that are caring. Actually, I think this is the learning from this chat platform, whatever. Just to know that somebody else has the same question or concern as I'm having might be super helpful, even if there might be another answer or whatever. I'm not alone. I think that's what we see. And I think, of course, the recommendation, and we know it's not designed for people, but with people, it's super important to go there and talk to them and to listen. So what I like in the terms of care, and of course you brought it to health, is that there's a change from all this sort of curing and technical R&D. And I see more and more places. So for example, at the GSA in Scotland, where we joined together winter school, John and I, sort of they are focusing on well-being. So what is well-being? Yeah, well-being is not wellness, and well-being is not sort of all the sort of technical devices to be sort of to feel better. I mean, this goes even into the new sort of domain of planetary health. So to better understand how we as humans feel well within our environment. So, and I'm all the time looking at your question that I like very much. How can we make a radical change for community-based solutions as a designer? I don't know. I think this is an opportunity, but that's very different to other questions where you're looking for what would be key elements to determine from the government side. Yeah, I think this brings you into please write a petition or a manifesto, and the government should react. But there might be very, very simple ways to empower the people, or to sort of make something very clear. And I think this is what you sort of need to look for. So therefore, I like this question a lot.
Just for those of you, I put into the chat an academic paper. So Lauren Tan did a PhD about this exact question of how you use social design to support the dementia community, people with dementia and their carers. This was now 12 years ago that you did the PhD. But I have to say that, yeah, the basic principle is go and work with the caring community. That's sort of what you need to start with, is that. And then the solutions and the kind of actions that you can propose, or apps or whatever, they're not going to be complicated. The bigger, it's just so frustrating that the government throws, well, all these governments, tens of billions of euros at medical research to look for a cure, but because they can't, the care economy, which has been discussed for 40 or 50 years, is not really a paid for economy, not always. And so the governments are not interested. They can't deal with it. They're not in their training. But you can, because you're designers. And you're going to focus on where do I create value for people, is by talking to the people who need that value, namely the carers for dementia sufferers. And then who pays for it is a second order question for me, not where not how do I get a profit, but somebody gets paid. But most of it's happening unpaid now. It's not a big deal.
Yes, that was a really kind of sad situation. Like we see that a lot around even us, like the situations, even in Korea, it's really serious. Like all the caring work should be like kind of done by the families or like relatives, not really support from the government. Maybe there's some, but it's not that enough for every like people. So yeah, this was really kind of eye opener to think about like the issue.
Just Jane, explore, look around at this thing called the care economy, or the dementia care economy. There's a lot of, in Australia, there's some very good work happening, lots of good work happening. Actually, in China, they're quite good at saying, well, this is not automatically something that has to be done by the government, but maybe the government can help the families or help the citizens do that. There's a very interesting phenomenon in Japan and China called social credit systems. Have you heard about that? So yes. Where you do work for society, like care for a person with dementia, or you clean the street, or you do something as a volunteer, but in some way or another you accumulate credits in your kind of score, not money but time credits or whatever, and then 50 years later when you need this yourself, you can spend those credits on getting people to help you. It's of course very controversial, but the point is it's better than doing nothing at all for the care. I mean, I'm quite optimistic that this social credit idea can be enhanced and improved so that people give time for care and then they get the time back later on in their life. I don't personally find that an awful concept. Lots of people are very scared and angry about that, but I'm not. So.
I think as we're talking about unpaid work, I think that's a very important topic. And in the pandemic, I think there's another notion of unpaid work. I did a lot of unpaid work because I was doing the job of my son's teacher. Yeah, and there's a lot of unpaid work that has been happening. We're pretty much used to unpaid work in terms of taking care for people and taking care for the household. And I think the matter is not to ask for money, but to think what's the real value inside it. Maybe the value is time. So you have all these time bank models. I'm helping you now, you're helping me either tomorrow and in 20 years time. That takes a certain burden of you. And if you connect this to the basic income, super interesting things might emerge actually.
There's a phrase in America, United States, called "we cannot be healthy alone," which is the basic proposition that it's not something you can't buy health. Well, you can try, you can give doctor thousands of dollars, but in general, health comes from having support around you, eat healthy food, healthy air, healthy soil, and that all those things going to be collaborative work through our lives, and that if we can create a healthy sort of life, then we will be a healthy people. And none of that is something we do on our own as isolated individuals. It's something that throughout history, we've collaborated on most of these activities. So it's returning to collaboration about care, but then modernizing that using new tools to, as Philip said, time banking or other forms of sharing the load so that we just do it in a more kind of modern way. But the principle of sharing it is not new.
Yes, yeah, I think we have excellent sort of discussion, so I like it. Is there any comment from your side as well? Because it would be cool to hear something. If not, I would ask maybe the last one to share. I don't know whether it should be either knowing or clothing, actually, because clothing might be interesting, because we discussed this earlier about sort of building the relations either to food or to clothes. And Christina, this is one of the notions that you also brought up. How can we connect with the people that make our clothes, and do they really want to, and do we really want to? I mean, we are super excited as designers to have the technical opportunities and to think of it sort of systems wise, but would the people sort of appreciate it? So this is, I think, one of the questions that came up in your investigation as well. I don't know, do you want to share a bit your perspectives on clothing as a final?
Yes, absolutely. I'll discuss my mirror board and go over the main points that we discussed. But just thinking how that connects with all the points that we have discussed during our whole semester of carrying and soil and our waterways. So thank you for bringing that up. One of the main points that we discussed in clothing was the use of energy during the lifetime of the clothing of a t-shirt.
Should I be looking at the Miro board?
Oh, sorry, let me just share that.
Oh yeah, please, just because I was, okay.
Does it work? Okay.
So one of the main points that we discussed from my findings, and some of them were from the reading, was that 2,700 liters or 700 gallons of water to make one man's cotton t-shirt. There was 85% of the aerial sea that has disappeared because water is being used to grow cotton in the desert. 90% of primary resources are discarded within 3 months. 16,600 liters to produce only 1 kilogram of leather. Shocking 1% of clothing are recycled into new ones. And moreover, young people today are unconcerned with the big picture problems, and the words such as quality or efficiency do not necessarily mean sustainability. So this was a mix of the reading and the findings. And we went on to discuss fast fashion today, which is one of the main issues, I believe, in our current clothing system. And one of the examples was the True Cost documentary, which I find very interesting. And some of more of the findings were that the world consumes nearly 80 billion new pieces of clothing each year, and 400% more than 2 decades ago. The average American generates 82 pounds of textile waste each year. More than 90% of cotton is genetically modified and responsible for 18% of worldwide pesticides and 25% of total insecticide. And the example that we want to discuss was the projects that are currently being done. Living Color is one of them, in which they use natural dyes to produce their clothing. Renew Cell is one of the solutions to the problem of 1% recycling only, which they use the pulp to produce textile waste, and everything is from 100% from textile waste. And one of the artists, Christian and Dersma, that has done many, as discussed in your reading, many interesting projects, such as the flax. Which brings me back to our discussion of the main points. And then from the points of 1% of clothing only being recycled and the use of energy and our water sources is new notion of owning and what behavior changes are necessary to make a positive impact. And would we even want something like this? What positive changes would making a connection to the people that are making our clothing create? And I think one of those would be more of a personal care, more awareness, of course, and also a connection to our clothing. If we know where it's coming from, we're aware of the issues and the life cycle and the energy use. We'll question it more and create more of a positive change that way, and also a connection of a network of people all around the world. And we're aware of their lifestyle, we're aware of their wages and their well-being. As it was discussed in the True Cost documentary, the building that collapsed that caused thousands of deaths. I think that was an eye-opening for the industry itself. And yes, that is the entry point from clothing, is the connection we can make with the people that make our clothing and what positive changes that can bring.
Nice. Are you, is that, okay, is that, have you, is that the story? Yes. Loss of material. So I imagine you've discovered, oh my God, this is a sort of expanding to infinity subject, because that's what most other people have discovered, Christina. But I've known people in this world called sustainable fashion for, probably 20 years, who have struggled so hard to unlock this kind of conundrum, is that however kind of much progress they might make on raising awareness, the industry itself kind of is just too strong, too big, too fast, too powerful, and that you end up with small changes of people's awareness and therefore of their activities, whereas a system, the industry, the fashion system, the two wash, two wear, just, that's 1,000 times bigger than any small changes that they make. I think that there is a dawning, and the last 2 or 3 years, the debate has begun to shift from, well, maybe behavior change is a no-win strategy. If we only do behavior change, then however much we change people's behavior, the system is much stronger than we are. And that maybe we have to therefore change the question away from how can we consume sustainably towards how can we help the land be healthier where our clothes come from. Not trying to, save the industry or change the industry, but change the question so that we then begin to have our relationships not with a reformed Nike or a reformed, H&M, but we connect with the people all over the world who grow the plants and grow the kind of materials from which our clothes are made. In other words, what we were saying about coffee and relational coffee, why not have relational cotton, relational wool? And that therefore what we do as sort of citizens who need clothes is, let's have a kind of check as our relationship, which should be with the wool network or with the cotton network. Now, I don't want to exaggerate how far that's gone, but there are two things I would just draw your attention to. One is, which has happened since the book, one is this network called the Union of Concerned Researchers in Fashion. Have any of you come across them? That's a kind of a network of people who are like at the edge of sustainability fashion, who said, we're just going backwards. We're not making any progress because there's however much attitudes, fantastic. We've raised awareness, but the awareness has done nothing to change the overall behavior of the fashion system. And they're the ones where they're beginning to say, maybe we actually should change the question and look more at the kind of the sources of our materials and have a direct relationship with them. And then the other one, which you may have, these two, I told Philip about these a lot. Have you heard of Fiber Shed or Ravelry? Anybody here? Well, Fiber Shed is a movement, but it started off as a kind of project in California called, let's look at all the people involved in getting wool off the back of a sheep.
10 seconds.
Rather than getting wool from some unknown foreign destination, you get wool from some region where you have a relationship with that region. And then the parallel network, which is more amazing, is called Ravelry. And that is kind of people who are obsessed by knitting patterns, socks, jumpers, hats, and everything to do with wool. And there's like 7 or 8 million members of that network who basically are obsessed by changing the relationship we have to wool. And they do that through the patterns, through making things to each other and so on. But the point is, that's quite a big network, 7 or 8 million people, more or less totally invisible in debates about sustainable fashion, because it's not about, it's not about saving the industry. It's about changing, making us all producers, connecting producers directly to each other. And I think it's so important. I'm not saying you should stop trying to change the industry. I'm just saying the industry is very strong and global and powerful. And if we make the industry 10% better or 20% better, which is very optimistic, it still leaves 80% killing the planet. So anyway, I'm so happy you chose that, because I think that And the True Cost is a great film. It's a great example of, if you're faced with costs that are not being paid by the industry, you either try and get the industry to pay the costs, or you try to stop those costs being incurred in the first place. And I think getting industries to pay costs is a loser's game. It does, the industry will pay a bit after years of campaigning. But why should we stop the industry standing between us and the sheep, or us and the cotton plant? Let's have a direct relationship with the cotton plant and the people, and then we discuss between us, how sustainable is your cotton field? How sustainable is your sheep of, flock of sheep? I'm very optimistic, as usual, that this is an alternative after so many bright and committed people spending so long banging their head up against the brick wall of, reforming the fashion system, which I just don't think is possible, personally.
Thank you. And I thought it was interesting your point of making that the industry at its core is changing the way we approach it. That's not by profit margins, but actually by the health of the land itself.
Yeah, I think this is at the heart of everything, is that what is valuable, and how do we make the health of the land more valuable than money or GDP or all this other stuff? And I don't have an answer to that question. I just think that's the answer is that how we get there is going to be societal change, cultural change, time, activism, design, art, all of these things. And there's a lot of people circling around that kind of shift. But as I said right at the beginning of today, we're talking about a transition from a system which is arguably 500 years old, and the whole entire world is kind of organized to look after that system, i.e. the capitalist system. It's not just going to disappear because of, just like that. It will disappear when we then make a replacement for it. I think that's what we're talking about today, is the little bits and pieces of a replacement system in which life is more important than money, and that all the bits of that are out there. And that's why it's so exciting. But we need to kind of improve the bits and help the bits connect to each other.
I had the question in the session to the students, who has ever been to a tailor? And I think one or two said yes, to just shorten the trousers. But I was thinking, of course, I think this is the first way to get in touch with your clothes. I mean, he's the one, even if he's the last one in the chain, pretty much. But of course, if you have a tailor, then he knows where the fabric might come from and so on, and you're in the middle of a conversation. But still, I think it's not so interesting for people. But maybe this notion of really thinking of the origin and the land use and resources exploitation actually might be a point to look at in terms of getting connections to this very sort of beginning of the origin and appreciating the planetary health. But still, you said 10%, so this means 90% are really keen on going to H&M and Primark and things like that. So it might take its time, but we shouldn't be nervous. We shouldn't be nervous. As you said, I think the time span of 500 years is perfectly right, but I think people are just nervous because we have this magic 2050 in front of us, because we have so many things should have had happen and not should start to happen. So nobody's talking.
I've been around too long. I've seen too many of these deadlines come and go. So, I'm genuinely. So the question is not, are we doomed, but how possible is it that things that are very small changes now, like Ravelry, suppose Ravelry, which is 8 million wool makers, connects up with Fibershed, which is people all over the world with sheep. How long will it take for them to create a parallel system, which will never be at all, right? It'll be tiny compared to the global system, but it'll be a better quality experience and the place where young people in particular want to be. So the transition will happen like that. And I can't possibly say how long it'll take, but just that I'm a very passionate believer that small things have the capacity to change the big system. And often we don't know which small things they are, but that's why I my own life is filled with, for the most part, small things, which I find beautiful. And then, yeah, I introduce the small things to each other, and hopefully, they go and do their thing. There's a thing
nearly sounds like a final quote to come to the islands of coherence.
Yeah. There are 400,000 tailors in India, by the way. So one of my many frustrated failures in my life is I never figured out how to get the 400,000 people, no, shirt makers, 400,000 shirt makers in India who don't, for some reason, make shirts for me. And there's a missing bit of infrastructure there. But I've had this discussion for 20 years, and I don't know there's something missing. And one of the things is that they have, it's what we were saying about coffee, that it's not always the case that people want to be a kind of in a one-to-one economy. It's actually a bit of a hassle. So if I order one shirt from one maker in India, and then I could change my mind or don't pay or send it back to have the sleeves altered, that's actually a hassle. Whereas if the shirt maker can sell 100 shirts to some intermediary or wholesaler, sometimes it's more convenient. So anyway, there's lots of adjustments for the designers to make.
I mean, you have the Indian suit makers who come to German hotels or airport lobbies to take your measurements, and then 6 weeks later, magic, you get your wonderful suit. But again, I think that's another type of relation, actually. Patricia brought up the question in the chat, as her mic is not working, about the hard work. I don't know if it's hard work or handwork or hard handwork. And I think this goes back to labor and skills and a new notion of economy, where you exchange maybe time. How long does it take? If time is the currency, how long does it take to tailor a shirt or whatever, or how much skill is needed to do so? But I think there are a lot of regions where you have this new types of economies based on exchange. At least those are small glimpses, and of course this wouldn't change the whole system, but I think those are all explored right now. And very often we feel that it's not fair to pay the one person 80 euros per hour and the other person 50 euros. I mean, especially as design students or design graduates, there's an extreme bandwidth in payment. So what's the real value for your work? It's super hard to say. It's super hard to say. So to me, this isn't a real argument. And you might come up and even as a designer to work for a farmer and say, I'm doing this for you, and then I'm helping you out or whatever, and we are working together, and you get to know each other and you get in touch. And I think that's the interesting thing. Again, connections, creating connections and relations.
I think the important thing
Yeah, please.
Just to have the conversations with the people who are doing it, rather than sit in your studio trying to think, how can I help a shirt maker in India? You need to find a way to talk to a shirt maker in India and find out what that person might benefit from. But anyway, we can come back to that another time if it needed to.
Or to a shirt maker in Cologne, yeah, where they are as well. And I think the example of this fiber shed shows actually that they're all around. And again, I think this notion of regional and seasonal, I think for clothing it's not so much seasonal, but at least regional. So what can you source from where we are right now? If you know where that you have sheep from the neighborhood, you might be interested in what the sheep are eating or whatever, or if it's really healthy, the grass that they are eating. So actually again, and then it's taking care of it. Yeah, in all the wonderful notions of this great word care. I think it's heavily underestimated, especially in German, where it's translated with Pflege, what means really just like a very sort of mechanical term of supporting the elderly people in processes. But I like there's no literal translation of care in all its meaning.
Oh, I didn't know that. But somebody mentioned Christine Meindiertsma, the Dutch designer. So she, for me, is a very good example and a very inspirational one of somebody who broadens the subject. So she works with fiber and textiles, amongst other things. But she, over her career so far, has managed to create value, which is not just physical value. So she, for example, she makes things out of flax and linen, maybe just some a piece of fiber. She makes films or gets people to make films about the fiber that explain the farmer's work, the person who spins it, all the different activities. And by the end of watching some of these films, you are in love with the material in the same way that she is. And you, of course, want to pay a bit more for something which is otherwise functionally similar to something you can buy in a supermarket. But the fiber has a story, it has a place, it has a people attached to it, it has living qualities, and so on. And that you can't put on a label, but she makes films, and you have a kind of journey through her experience, and then at the end of it, say, yeah, I'm going to have one of these towels or dresses because I love the whole background where it came from, and I have a relationship with her, with the fiber, and with the place.
You mentioned the Chinese farmers, the 500,000 on the Taobao platform, actually to sharing their daily work, actually, and to allowing the people to sort of connect to their agricultural processes and ways they are cultivating their whichever plants and herbs and fruits and vegetables.
Well, the biggest revelation I had in that whole China project was that there are many, many people in cities who have no intention of becoming a peasant or a farmer, just because I say so or because nature says so, but they're very interested in having a part-time relationship with the farmer. So maybe they go there for a week or 2 weeks a year, or maybe they go and help with some aspect of the process, or just go and learn about it. And there are, the most inspiring farms respond to that by saying, okay, you can come here and be a student for 2 weeks and learn about, I don't know, mangoes in our farm, and then you can become a client and maybe buy the mangoes from us later on. And by the time you've been a sort of mango student for 2 weeks and met the people and spent those 2 weeks, you for sure are going to buy your mangoes from there rather than from somewhere else. And maybe you go back to the city and make a mango cooperative, a buyer's cooperative. So that I'm not suggesting that these patterns are clear yet, but it's just that the connections can be made, and then you add the services and add the experiences that change your relationship to somebody just buying a mango to having a relationship with a mango farm.
I wonder what happens if we have students going to the avocado farm, because everybody knows we shouldn't eat avocados, but we do. So going there might explore either opportunities to support people actually, or to have another level.
We have a whole class in our summer school in Sweden about alternatives to mango, to avocados, or how can we use native products such as potatoes to create things which are not so different from exotic things like avocados. And I literally yesterday was seeing Corina has got a whole thing about making wasabi out of horseradish. And wasabi is an expensive Japanese vegetable you have with sushi. And what you can do is to get horseradish, which is a natural Swedish plant, and then you dye it green, which is cheating. But anyway, it's a journey. So anyway, but she has all these food waste people and food experiments say, how do we replace the avocado, not by negation and like going on a diet, but how do we bring something into our diet which is as good or different from avocado, but comes from plants that we grow locally? And that has the two benefits of not buying avocados from Peru or somewhere, but also giving work, and it's a new business for somebody, whoever is growing the horseradish, which has nearly disappeared from Sweden. And thanks to Corina, the horseradish growing has become a new boom. So that's another thing, you can become a horseradish farmer. Why not?
We have horseradish as well in Germany. I like it. Okay. I appreciate your time. We nearly talked for about 2 hours without a single break. So are there any sort of final questions, comments that you want to fire off or share from the student side? Because you couldn't all share what you've been doing.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to thank you because the book was really inspiring and so optimistic, like you also said, and it wasn't only just reading do less or minimize, but it was full of very inspiring projects which opened a big world. Yes.
Thank you. I'm always very happy to meet people who've actually read some of it. So one of the secrets of being a writer is that if after a great deal of trouble you sell your book, most people don't actually read the book. So I'm very happy that you've read bits. So thank you so much. And I really learned a lot from you guys, because the whole purpose of that was to get you started and you to kind of carry on and go find new stories and new relationships that I didn't think about. So that's the purpose.
Yeah, perfect, Lara. Thank you for thanking. I wanted to do that as well, but it's perfect if you do that. I also thank you a lot, John, for taking your time and for being so excited about the idea that I shared at the beginning. Of course, I want to listen. I want to talk to the students, what they see, what they read in the book, what they make out of the book. And I hope you students, guys, enjoyed as well, actually, to sort of explore those topics, having the opportunity to discuss it later on. And so, yeah, we will meet again for a final session, maybe not 2 hours, maybe 1 hour feedback to sort of really close it. But I'm happy that we could close the seminar today with having John as a guest. So John, once again, thank you very much for joining us. It was a real pleasure always to talk to you. And I promised the students he will write a lot in the chat. He's firing off ideas and sort of cases, and I think that helps a lot. And I will share this with you together with the movies, with the recording, so that if you want to sort of review something, feel free to do that. So thank you all. It was great to see you, John and students. And we meet again next week. And John, we meet again sooner or later this summer, I guess.
Won't be long for it. Yeah. Okay.
Latest. Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey.